everybody, and welcome to the first episode of the Alternate History Podcast. This podcast will go over how things in life actually went. Then it will go over what would cause the different timeline and the effects of it. Today, we are going to be talking about a very underrated war, the Mexican-American War. Anyway, let's get to it. The Mexican-American War was a result of America's dream of manifest destiny, which it basically means that the country of the United States of America shall go from the Pacific Sea to the Atlantic Sea, and that God allowed this to happen. Now that manifest destiny is settled, let's talk about Mexico for a second. In September of 1810, Mexico gained independence from the Spanish Empire and gained the territory of not only its modern borders, but also Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California. Shortly after independence, American settlers came into Texas, and Mexico's control of the Texas territory has made them uncomfortable. This had made New Mexico a little nervous, so they stopped a land contract they had made earlier. One American general in Texas wanted autonomy, leading to the events of the Texan War of Independence. After the war, Texas became independent in the year 1836, and just 1 year later admitted to become a U.S. state. But the U.S. ignored it because Texas wanted to become a slave state, and admitting Texas would disrupt balance in the Senate. Days before Polk went into office, when it has chosen who would control the country, the drawing on the wall shows that the U.S. had annexed Texas. The U.S. would soon have talks with Britain and would admit Oregon in the country as a free state. So the U.S. admitted Texas as a state, restoring the balance of the USA. The U.S. then asked if they could purchase California from Mexico, but they said no. Under future President Zachary Taylor, troops were put in a disputed border region in Texas. Later, fighting would break out between American forces, which was followed by a declaration of war by Polk, claiming that the Mexicans have shed blood on American soil. On the 14th of June in 1846, the Republic of California was declared, and America started fighting 6 days later. Another 6 days later, the U.S. had connected borders with the Republic of California. 1 week later, the Republic of California was annexed by the U.S. Later that year, fighting began in the eastern Mexico, and the U.S. has made naval invasions on Mexico. America would have what they wanted on the 14th of January the next year. But Mexico would not surrender. On the 7th of December, America would annex what is left of modern day's America's territory in Mexico. Fighting ended on the 2nd of February, 1848.
It's because of me. It's because of me.
Now, what would have made the war go in Mexico's favor? In real life, the Americans crushed the Mexicans in the war. One thing that would have made it go in their favor would be a stronger military or foreign supporter. Now, European support is unlikely because they either have good relations with the U.S. or they are bitter over losing colonies. Other former Spanish colonies are out of the picture too, considering 1, South America has their own stuff going on, and 2, Mexico has ruled over Central America 20 years earlier. Only a better military would make this happen. Perhaps the Spanish left some plans for better war tools and armor. So let's say this happened. Everything plays the same until fighting starts. It would still go the same. Why? Because of the infighting in Mexico. Let's say that the Mexicans realized that the real enemy is the United States. Even the populace, they would still fail because they were broke and supplies were lackluster. Let's say that Mexico could import goods to other countries and they had money for the war. With all those factors, Mexico could barely win the war.
Barry is from another universe.
A Mexican victory of the war would most likely end with Mexico annexing the Oregon area and getting back Texas, maybe even having Oklahoma, Nebraska, Kansas, and Montana. America would also have to pay damages done to Mexico. Since the cotton gin was invented, the Civil War would still happen. The cotton gin could do the work of 100 men. And since cotton is big in the South rose up, so the Civil War would happen. Without Oregon, California, and Texas, the CSA will win from the lack of Union support. The possibility of a foreign intervention, unless if Mexico would be willing for round two, but since they just finished the war, they most likely won't intervene. After the sake of the Civil War, they would most likely leave the U.S. entirely, not associating with the free people. With the South and Mexico with the same relation, it would be likely if they improved relations. Being restricted to the Northwest, the belief in manifest destiny would be scrapped, and since they have suffered from 2 wars, isolationism would be popular among the community, just like it did in real life. Since relations with the British are not that great, they would most likely be in a state the Mexicans were in real life. There was a mentality that the Europeans should leave the Americas and just worry about their own mainland. With the U.S. in the state, Spain would stay in Cuba and the Philippines. While on the topic, Russia would still have Alaska and Hawaii would still be independent. Other than those differences, history in Europe would still be the same. Without a power gap, Mexico will be the replacement for the U.S. So everything that the U.S. did would most likely be replaced by Mexico. World War I would play out almost the same, but the Zimmerman telegram would be given to America. But of course, the British intercept it and tell Mexico, pulling Mexico into the war. World War I would play out the same, and the interwar period would go the same way too, considering the manpower and other stuff. Since Mexico has most of North America, Mexico wouldn't be interested in islands in the Pacific as America was, making other Europeans to be the ones to take the Pacific before Japan takes them. By 1936, the Spanish Civil War would take place, and from the victory of the nationalists, Cuba and the Philippines would be wanting independence. Not wanting another war, Franco would give them independence. World War II would go about the same until Japan expands into the Pacific. Without another nation controlling the islands, Nazi Germany would not worry about an invasion to its land. Since Britain would not have enough supplies to launch such an invasion without America in the war, Japan could focus on China. With enough focus, they would win against China, and most likely join Germany's war with the USSR. With 2 fronts to worry about, the Soviets would capitulate, giving land to both Germany and Japan. With Britain left, Mexico would join the war to liberate the Spaniards from Francisco Franco. Spain would now join the Axis and join the war for lands. With the CSA as a friend, the CSA would join in on the Allies too. During this time, fascism would grow in America to regain its hold on the continent. And since most of North America is in the Allies, America would join the Axis, as Germany is fighting the Allies. The North American campaign would take a while, even though Germany has lack of a navy. Japan has a big navy, and since Japan wants Pacific dominance, they would not only take remaining Allied oceanic land, they would also take North American land from Mexico and Canada, putting them in a 2-front war, defeating them. Britain now only has India, which is being invaded by the Japanese, and Africa, which is also being invaded by other Axis members. The British would surrender to the Germans in 1946, putting the world in an Axis-controlled world. This would be the gains for each of the members. American gains would be the CSA, the pre-Mexican American Wars with Mexico, besides California, Oregon, and Washington, and most Canadian lands. The most Canadian lands would go to USA. The German gains would be Alsace-Lorraine, the Benelux, pre-World War I borders with Poland, southern Danish lands, and German lands from Switzerland. Note that Germany already had Austria and Czechia directly being controlled before the war. Germany also gains the Belgian Congo and Iraq as colonies. The Italian gains southern French lands, Italian lands from Switzerland, coastal lands from Yugoslavia, all of Greece, Turkey, Syria, the Holy Land, Algeria, Egypt, Tunisia, and a coastal territory from Sudan. Spanish gains would be Portugal, Morocco, Angola, and Mozambique. The Japanese gains would be Eastern Siberian lands, Alaska, British Columbia, Oregon, Washington, California, Baja California, and other countries counties from Mexico touching the Pacific. China was settled in a different peace conference, by the way. And also Finnish gains would be Karelia, Estonia, and Latvia. The Balkans would still be a question, considering the high nationality in the Balkans and claims on each other's lands. Eventually, the Balkans would be at war again, and Italy would interfere and annex the rest of Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Romania, and southern Hungarian lands. The reaction to Italian expansion would in turn rebirth the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, with the rest of the Hungarian lands. A war would shortly come with the USSR, and since the Russians were heavily devastated by the war, more than Poland, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth would gain more modern lands, Belarus and Ukraine. After 10 years, it would be 1958, and protests would grow around the world, which would most likely be civil rights movements, a government change, and independence movements. Like in our timeline, this would take a while, so government changes and civil rights changes were made, but independence movements would still be suppressed. Africa would be given independence by former Allied powers. Some Axis powers would give independence, but Italy has other plans. He would invade Morocco, then invade Spain on both sides. Italy's dream is to revive the Roman Empire. This is why Italy invaded Spain. Italy would still be France's weak state to invade it. By this time, it would be the early 1980s. By this time, Hitler would be dead, so Germany would have to elect another ruler. Italy will also take the advantage of this to take former Roman lands and lands from the Polish. All that Italy would have left to take over would be Britain, but Italy has made so many enemies, so when Italy declares war in the 90s, Germany and uprisings in Italian lands would declare war on Italy, pushing Italy to the point of the core Italian lands. All the world is now peaceful thanks to the fall of the Soviets at the same time of the final war. Thank you all for listening to me rambling on and on. The first episode of the History Podcast. I will see you all next time.